cold concrete presses against my cheek. My eyelids are gritty, swollen with sleep that never refreshes. When I force them open, the basement is mostly black, except for a thin slice of light leaking through a gap above the wooden stairs. Dust drifts through it, slow and indifferent. I try to shift and the chain answers, scraping across the floor with a sound that feels too loud for a place meant to hide pain. The metal cuff around my ankle has rubbed the skin raw. Every movement sends a sharp sting that fades into a stubborn throb. The air tastes like damp soil and moldy lumber. Somewhere in the dark, water drips at a steady pace, like a metronome for misery. No windows, no clock. Down here, time isn't measured in hours. It's measured in hunger, in thirst, in how long I can keep my thoughts from cracking. My throat burns when I swallow. I can't remember the last sip of water, only the way my body reaches for it like it's a memory. Food arrives when someone feels like it, slid down the stairs by a masked figure who never speaks. In the beginning, I screamed until my voice turned to sand. Then I learned the rule of this place. Noise doesn't summon help. Noise only drains you faster. So I conserve myself. I move only when I have to. I breathe shallow to keep my ribs from aching. I count heartbeats because it's the closest thing to a calendar I can trust. Sometimes I press my nails into my palm just to feel a pain I can control. Sometimes I bargain with the dark, promising I'll be better, I'll be grateful, I'll never complain again. Then I hate myself for bargaining, because I'm Rachel Carter, an ER nurse, the one who tells other people to hold on. Eli keeps showing up in my mind anyway, 6 years old. He used to wait by the window when I worked late, pretending he wasn't tired, insisting he needed to tell me one more detail about his day. I picture him waking up and asking why I didn't come home. I picture a teacher calling my number and getting silence. I don't know who picked him up from school. I don't know what story he's been given about me. The thought that he might believe I chose to disappear hurts worse than the chain. The last clear memory I own is bright hospital light and exhaustion, a double shift that left my legs trembling. I remember peeling off gloves, washing my hands until the skin felt too thin, checking my phone for a message from daycare. I remember promising pancakes in the morning. I remember the hospital parking lot, October wind cutting through my scrubs, my keys slippery in my hand. Then a sharp sting at my neck, a sweet chemical smell, and the world tilting out from under me. That was months ago, I think. The basement has made a liar out of calendars. Some mornings I wake convinced it's the same night, the same hour, the same trapped breath. Other days I notice my nails have grown, my hair has turned into a knot. My body feels lighter in a way that scares me. Tonight feels different. I can tell because the silence changes first. Voices, plural. Not the single set of footsteps I've come to dread, but multiple people moving fast. A shout slices through the house above. Something heavy crashes. My stomach clenches so hard it feels bruised. I drag myself backward, chain biting, and press into the corner where shadows are thickest, as if darkness can hide me from whatever comes next. Glass shatters upstairs. A door slams. Boots hammer down the stairs. Light floods the basement, blinding and white. My body reacts before my mind does. I throw my arm over my face and curl smaller, bracing for pain. The footsteps stop a few yards away. For a beat there's only the drip, my ragged breathing, and the electric hum of the light cutting through the dark. Then a man's silhouette holds at the bottom step, broad shoulders, perfectly still, like he's been struck by what he sees. I feel his anger before I understand it, controlled but immense. He mutters a rough curse under his breath, not aimed at me, more like disbelief. He doesn't move like my captor. He freezes, then turns his head as if issuing orders to people I can't see. Another flashlight beam swings, catches the chain, my ankle, the pipe. The man's voice is low and clipped, the kind that expects obedience. He demands bolt cutters. He orders someone to call a doctor and get them here now. I hear bodies scramble, radios crackling. The light shifts as he steps closer. Rain glistens on his suit, dark fabric clinging to his frame. Water drips from his hair onto the concrete. He crouches, stopping just out of reach, hands open and visible, like he knows I might panic. I can't see his face clearly, only the hard focus of his eyes and the glare. My throat tries to form words and fails. All I can do is stare and decide, in a heartbeat, whether to fight or trust. And when the bolt cutters clink open behind him, I realize I'm about to find out which kind of danger he is. Metal jaws clamped around the chain, and for a second I thought the sound would snap me in half. The cutters bit down with a harsh crunch. Then the weight at my ankle vanished so suddenly my body swayed, like I'd been leaning on the pain all along. My foot hit the concrete, numb, and I couldn't decide whether to cry or vomit. The man stayed low, close enough that his shadow covered me, far enough that I could still breathe. His hands were steady, his shoulders angled so I could see he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Behind him, men moved fast, radios whispering, footsteps doubling back, someone coughing from the dust. He issued short orders, and they moved on them without hesitation. When he slid a jacket around my shoulders, the fabric was heavy and warm, smelling of rain and clean soap and something expensive that didn't belong underground. My body tried to flinch at the contact, but my muscles were too weak to do more than tremble. I hated that weakness. I hated how my mind stayed sharp while my limbs felt borrowed. He lifted me, not roughly, not gently either, more like I was a patient being moved off a gurney before the hallway flooded. The motion made my stomach pitch. The basement light vanished behind us, and the stairs rose like a cliff. Each step jolted my ankle, and I clenched my teeth to keep from making noise that would sound like pleading. Upstairs hit me in flashes, marble under boot soles, a hallway that smelled like lemon polish, drawers pulled out, cushions ripped open, men in dark suits sweeping rooms with a focus that said they weren't police and didn't need to pretend. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in a mirror, and barely recognized the hollow face staring back. Outside, rain hammered the driveway hard enough to blur the lights into streaks. The cold air slapped my skin, and for a breath I almost welcomed it because it proved I was above ground. Headlights spilled across wet stone. A black sedan waited with the engine running, and the men moved around it like the car was an extension of their bodies. The man got in beside me, filling the space with quiet control. I watched his profile, the stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes kept shifting to mirrors and windows instead of settling on me. He spoke into a phone, voice tight with restraint, demanding a doctor, demanding broth, demanding names. I didn't know who he was, but I knew what kind of person could make other people move like that. I tried to ask where we were going and only managed a broken sound. My throat burned, my lips cracked. Shame crawled up my spine because even that small question felt like begging. He didn't touch me again, but he adjusted the jacket, then pressed a bottle of water into my hands through someone else, as if he didn't want to startle me with his own closeness. The first swallow hurt. The second made my vision swim. I forced myself to drink slow, the way I'd coached dehydrated patients in triage. Still, my thoughts kept slipping to Eli. It was a punch every time. If I was missing, then my son was missing me, and the world had a cruel way of turning a mother's absence into a story someone else wrote. The car turned, tires hissing, and we passed through streets I couldn't place. I tracked details anyway. Turns, bridges, the shape of the skyline, the way the driver avoided roads. I watched the man's hands. No tremor, no fidgeting, the kind of steady that came from practice. At some point he said his first name, clipped and simple, like it was a fact, not an introduction. Vincent. It landed in my chest without comfort. I knew a Vincent could be anybody, but the way the men answered him told me it wasn't the first time they'd risked their lives on his word. The gates appeared out of the rain, tall iron bars opening with a smooth automatic glide. Cameras watched us from the stone pillars. Beyond them, a house glowed with warm light, too bright against the storm, too calm after the basement. My skin prickled anyway. Fortresses can be beautiful. Fortresses can still be prisons. As we pulled up, the front door opened, and a woman stepped out, older, wrapped in a cardigan. Her face creased with alarm when she saw me. She hurried forward with a softness that didn't match the guns and suits, hands already reaching for towels, for warmth, for the basic human things. Someone called her Mrs. Alvarez. Someone else addressed Vincent with a last name that sliced through me like ice. Moretti. The sound hit my ribs like a warning bell. In Philly, that name lived in whispers and clean headlines that never told the whole truth. Warm light spilled over the steps as Mrs. Alvarez guided me inside, and I wondered what kind of family Mercy could belong to. Warmth met me at the doorway, so sudden it felt like a shove. The house smelled of lavender and lemon, nothing like the basement's wet earth. Mrs. Alvarez guided me down a hall with soft rugs that swallowed footsteps, while men in suits stayed at the edges, scanning corners like shadows with eyes. Vincent walked beside us, close enough to block danger, far enough to avoid crowding me. Every light was too bright. Every silence sounded staged. My body kept waiting for the chain to snap tight again, even as my ankle floated free. I counted exits, like in triage. She sat me in a blue-painted room and pressed a glass into my hands. Water first, then a cup of warm broth that tasted almost bland, which was exactly what my stomach could tolerate. Her fingers were gentle when she dabbed my mouth with a cloth, but her kindness made me suspicious, as if comfort had to cost something. Somewhere downstairs a phone rang and Vincent's voice answered, low and clipped, giving directions that turned into movement. A doctor was coming. A tray of supplies appeared. People did not ask permission around him. They received instructions. Pulse still raced. In the bathroom, steam rose like a blessing I didn't deserve. Mrs. Alvarez stayed close but turned her face away when I undressed, as if privacy could be rebuilt one careful choice at a time. The shower water ran gray, then clear, and the sound of it filled every space in my head where screams used to live. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Hollow cheeks, bruised exhaustion, hair matted into stubborn knots. The mark around my ankle was not pretty, but it was proof of survival. She wrapped me in robe that felt like armor. The room had clean sheets and a lamp with a warm shade, yet my nerves stayed wired. I kept listening for the masked figure, for the scrape of food on wood, for a laugh upstairs. Instead, I heard quiet footsteps and the soft click of doors being checked. Vincent did not come in. His presence hovered in the hallway, measured, controlled, like he'd drawn a line he would not cross. Part of me was grateful. Part of me read it as strategy. I tried to picture Eli's face without crying, and that alone told me I was trapped just differently. After Mrs. Alvarez left, I lay back and forced my mind to work like it used to in triage. How had Evan found me? People don't vanish into basements by accident. The answer had to start before the parking lot, before the needle sting, before the darkness. A memory surfaced, sharp as alcohol swab, the ER, fluorescent glare, a man on a gurney with a charming smile that never reached his eyes. It was a Tuesday night in April, a little after 9, and I was already running on fumes. He looked forgettable. That is what scares me the most. He'd come in with a minor crash story, a cut on his forehead, and the confidence of someone used to being accommodated. I cleaned the wound, checked his vitals, and kept my voice professional while he tested the edges of it. He asked where I was from, why a woman with my patients worked nights, whether I had someone waiting at home. At the time, it felt like harmless flirting from a bored patient. I remember laughing once, the reflex of politeness, and hating myself immediately. When I tried to leave the bay, he drew me back with questions again. Eventually, he pushed for my number, sliding from charm into insistence so smoothly I almost missed it. I said no the way I'd said no to intoxicated patients and angry families, firm but polite, and I watched something dark flicker behind his smile. He covered it fast, but my skin still remembers the moment. He made it sound like I owed him gratitude for noticing me. I finished my charting, handed off his discharge papers, and walked away telling myself it was nothing. Nurses learn to swallow discomfort to keep the shift moving. Months later, chained to pipe, I understood. In the clean room, that ER memory left me shaking. When Vincent returned, his expression was controlled. He wanted details about the man from the hospital, and I gave them, watching his jaw tighten with every sentence. I braced for denial, for excuses, for a lie that would keep his world. None came. He let the truth sit between us like a blade. Evan was his brother, younger and volatile, and he had acted alone. Vincent did not apologize for the darkness, but he made one thing unmistakable. Kidnapping a woman for saying no violated the code he lived by. After he left, the room seemed to shrink. The robe on my skin was soft. The sheets were clean, but my mind kept replaying the word brother until it lost meaning. I wanted to rage at Vincent, to blame him for sharing blood with a monster, and I also wanted to believe that the line he described would protect me. Those wants fought inside my chest like two strangers. I curled under the blanket and held it like a shield. Somewhere beyond my door, a house of guards kept watch. Somewhere beyond these gates, my son kept living without me. I lay there wondering what safe meant now, and who I would have to become to reach it. Sleep came in broken pieces. I would surface to the soft click of Mrs. Alvarez's shoes, to the scent of broth, to Dr. Park's calm hands checking my pulse and the angry ring around my ankle. Then I would sink again, dragged under by exhaustion so heavy it felt like medication. Sometimes he asked me to rate my pain and I answered like a nurse, naming numbers instead of feelings. Sometimes he lifted the bandage and frowned, adjusting the antibiotics, reminding me to keep the leg elevated. I watched his pen move across a chart and tried to pretend I was only a patient, not a missing person. Each time Mrs. Alvarez brought food, it arrived in stages, as if my stomach had to be reintroduced to kindness. Warm broth became oatmeal became scrambled eggs, and every bite came with a glass of water placed within reach. I ate slowly, listening for threats that never came, and thinking of Eli's lunchbox, The dinosaur one with the chipped zipper. Had someone packed it? Had someone written his little note in the corner? The one that always said, "I love you, be brave"? In the quiet hours, my brain ran logistics the way it used to run triage. School pickup was at 3. Daycare charged late fees. My emergency contact list was short, and the person at the top was my mother, who had died years ago, which meant the second name mattered more than I wanted to admit. I pictured Eli's teacher calling again and again, hearing a voicemail that never filled. I pictured a social worker asking why a mother disappeared without warning. I told myself to breathe, to stay in the moment. But the moment kept stretching into questions with teeth. Vincent stayed mostly out of sight. I heard him downstairs, heard the steel in his voice when he gave instructions, heard doors open and close with purpose. Once, in the hallway, a brief pause in footsteps told me he had stopped outside my room, and my heartbeat kicked like it recognized him as both shelter and storm. He never came in during daylight. That restraint should have felt respectful. Instead, it made my suspicion bloom. Was he keeping distance because he regretted what his name represented, or because I was evidence he needed to manage? My body improved in tiny, measurable ways. The fever stayed down. The swelling eased. I could stand long enough to brush my teeth without black spots swimming in my vision. None of that mattered at night. When the house creaked, I flinched. When rain hit the window, I heard the basement drip. I woke from shallow sleep with my hands clenched, convinced the cuff was back on my skin. Mrs. Alvarez would appear with a fresh cloth and a steady gaze, and I would pretend I wasn't terrified, because being terrified felt like giving Evan one more victory. On the 4th morning, Dr. Park said my blood work looked steadier, and that I was no longer in immediate danger. I latched onto the phrase like it meant safety, until I realized the danger I feared most wasn't in my ankle. It was in paperwork. I asked Mrs. Alvarez what the outside world thought had happened to me, and her face tightened in a way that answered before her words did. She told me, gently, that the police had stopped looking, that my car had been found with blood, that the state had moved on. In the simplest language she could manage, she let me understand I had been declared dead. Dead. The word didn't fit my body, which was painfully alive, but it fit the way the world treats women who vanish. A file gets closed. A chair at work gets filled. A child gets assigned a new routine. My hands started shaking so hard the water in my glass trembled. If I was dead on paper, what did that make me to Eli's school, to his doctor, to whoever had been making decisions while I was chained underground? Was I still his mother in the eyes of the law, or just a memory people used to soften their voices? I thought about Vincent's men moving through rooms, about the way everything here ran like a machine. Someone had already known my name, my job, my address. Someone had already chosen what I was allowed to hear and when. Maybe Vincent had planned to fix the paperwork later, to bring Eli back to me when it was convenient, when it was safe. The idea lit a quiet rage in my chest. I had survived months in the dark by refusing to let my mind give up. I wasn't going to accept being erased because a powerful man decided the truth was too complicated for me. That afternoon, I asked for Vincent, not as a patient asking for a doctor, but as a mother asking for her life. If I was going to stay under his roof, I needed facts, timelines, and a voice in every decision that touched my son. From now on, I met Vincent in his study the afternoon the word dead stopped being abstract. Mrs. Alvarez had set a tray of broth and crackers on the corner of the desk like she was trying to soften the room. The rest of it was steel and glass. Multiple screens played silent security feeds. A map of the property glowed on a monitor. Papers sat in neat stacks, the kind of order that only exists when someone refuses to let chaos win. Vincent didn't invite me in with warmth. He didn't need to. The house already moved to his gravity. Even sitting still, he felt like a decision that had already been made. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. Not casually, not dramatically, just a controlled movement, like he was placing a tool within reach. I didn't open it yet. I stared at it the way I used to stare at a patient chart right before bad news. I told him what Mrs. Alvarez had said, what my own brain had pieced together, that on paper I was gone, that in the eyes of the city, my son's mother had vanished and been replaced by a memorial and a file number. I watched his face for flinches and found none, which made my stomach tighten. He had known. He had been handling it, the same way he handled everything, with lawyers and calls and controlled timing. That was the first wave. The familiar helplessness trying to crawl back into my skin. The sense that decisions were being made around me again, by men with radios and keys and clean hands. Even in this mansion, I heard locks click at night. I saw the weight of a key card when a guard swiped me through a door. I felt watched, protected, managed. The basement had a chain. This place had protocols. Vincent answered my fear with solutions. Efficient ones. He outlined routes forward the way someone outlines a tactical plan. Legal paperwork to correct my status. A safe address that wasn't mine. A security detail if I ever stepped outside. Controlled communication so no one could trace me. He spoke like certainty was comfort. To him, safety meant reducing variables until nothing could surprise you. But I wasn't a variable. I was a mother. The second wave hit when I pictured Eli's classroom. A teacher asking where his mom went. A social worker deciding who signed his forms. A judge, if it came to that, reading my life like it was a case study. I felt my throat tighten and forced myself to keep my voice steady, because panic is contagious and I refused to spread it. I made it clear, in the simplest terms, that his fortress could still be a cage. That I didn't survive months underground just to be hidden away in a prettier room. That Eli didn't need a mother who was safe and secret. He needed a mother who existed, legally and publicly enough to pick him up, to sign his report cards, to show up at a doctor's appointment without asking permission from a man with cameras. Vincent didn't argue with emotion. He didn't try to soothe me. He listened the way he listened to threats. Still, sharp, calculating. And then he did something that surprised me. He acknowledged, without softness, that he had been making decisions for me because he believed that was the only way to keep me alive. Not because he thought he owned me, but because he lived in a world where hesitation got people killed. That admission didn't erase my anger. It gave it a target. The third wave was mine. I set the boundary like I was drawing a line on a chart. If I stayed here, it would be temporary and it would be on terms I agreed to. I needed truth, not curated updates. I needed to know what he knew about Evan, what he didn't know, and what the plan was to find him. I needed consent to matter in this house, not as a courtesy, but as a rule. And I needed a path back to my son that didn't depend on someone else deciding the timing was convenient. Silence sat between us while the security monitors kept looping, showing men walking perimeter lines in rain. Vincent's jaw tightened once, then eased. He reached for the envelope again, tapped it like he was marking a point on a map. Inside, he explained, were the first steps. Documents his attorneys were preparing, contact information for a family lawyer who could help me navigate custody, and a plan to begin correcting the record. Not instantly, not cleanly, but deliberately. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Instead of offering me a gilded hiding place, he offered me purpose. He pointed out, almost bluntly, that Mrs. Alvarez ran the household with discipline but was carrying too much alone. He suggested I help her with light administrative work, supplies, schedules, correspondence. Not as charity, as structure, as proof I wasn't just a victim in a guest room. And he added the second part, the one that made my pulse steady in a different way. His staff and security had injuries and chronic issues they ignored until they became emergencies. Having a nurse on site would make the house safer. It would also make me myself again. He didn't pitch it like romance. He pitched it like respect. I realized, sitting there, that he was offering me something more valuable than comfort. He was offering me a role that couldn't be locked away. When I finally reached across the desk, the gesture felt like signing a contract without ink. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. Mine shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of choosing. We didn't promise forever. We promised clarity. We promised honesty. We promised that my life wasn't something to be managed without my input. That night, Mrs. Alvarez showed me where the household kept its medical supplies. The next morning, I stood at a spare table near the kitchen and started sorting bandages and antiseptic like it was the most normal thing in the world. A guard approached with a sprained wrist, awkward and respectful, and my hands remembered who I was. Somewhere deep in the house, a door clicked shut, and I knew the nightmares would come again. But now, I also knew what I would demand when they did. The first morning I worked, the house felt less like a museum and more like a place with a pulse. Mrs. Alvarez handed me a clipboard, a pen, and a stack of delivery slips, and my nerves settled the way they used to during shift change. Coffee smelled like roasted comfort. I checked the pantry list, marked what was low, and filed mail that had piled up while I was missing. Small tasks, but they stitched minutes together. When my hands stayed busy, my mind stopped sprinting back to concrete and chains. I could breathe without counting, just for once. Around mid-morning, one of the guards hovered near the kitchen doorway, flexing his wrist like it betrayed him. I motioned him to the table, washed my hands, and did what came automatically. Check swelling, test movement, ask what happened without making him feel stupid. It was a mild sprain from training. I wrapped it snug, wrote down instructions for ice and rest, and made him promise to come back if pain changed. He left looking relieved, and the staff watched me differently, as if competence was a language they understood. News travels fast when tough men finally admit they hurt. By afternoon, 2 more appeared with minor problems they would normally ignore. A sliced palm, a stubborn cough, a bruised rib from sparring. I set rules in my head and followed them. I cleaned, assessed, documented, and referred anything beyond my scope to Dr. Park. I organized supplies in labeled bins, started a simple logbook, and asked Mrs. Alvarez for a small spare room off the pantry. She gave it to me with a proud nod. The men waited their turn, surprisingly patient, because they knew Vincent expected respect around me. That expectation felt like armor I had not earned. 3 days into the routine, a longtime driver named Marcus complained of headaches he called nothing. I took his pressure twice, then a third time after he sat quietly, and every reading stayed dangerously high. My stomach went cold with the same urgency I felt in the ER. I wrote it down, circled the numbers, and flagged it for medication. I also told him, gently but firm, that stress and smoking were not badges of toughness. When Vincent reviewed my notes, I watched his face tighten, not at me, but at the risk. He cared about Marcus more than expected. The next morning, boxes arrived with medical equipment I had only seen behind hospital supply doors. A real cuff, better dressings, antibiotics, even a small portable monitor. Vincent never presented it like a gift. He treated it like infrastructure. I understood the message anyway. He wanted the house to run safely, and he wanted my role to be unquestioned. Later, when a guard tried to brush off my instructions, Vincent's presence in the hall made the man straighten and return for follow-up without argument. Respect traveled downward from the top. Being backed by power still made me uneasy today. Mrs. Alvarez kept my days gentle at the edges. She showed me where she stored fresh linens, how she labeled keys, which grocer delivered on Tuesdays. We folded towels while a pot of coffee cooled, and for a moment I could pretend I belonged to a normal household. Then I would see a cereal box with a cartoon dinosaur on it, meant for a visiting nephew, and my chest would pinch. Eli would have laughed at that dinosaur. I wrote his name once on a scrap of paper, just to prove he was real, then tucked it into my pocket. Nights were harder. The first nightmare came like a trap door. I was back on concrete, throat burning, chain scraping, and I woke with my hands clawing the sheet. I tried to breathe through it, but the room swam. Footsteps appeared outside my door, slow and deliberate. A chair scraped softly across the hall floor, then settled. Vincent did not enter. He simply stayed on the other side, a quiet weight against the darkness. Hearing him there changed the shape of the fear. I could still panic, but I did not feel hunted alone. My body listened and let heartbeat slow. In the day, I told myself I did not need him. I had my training, my routines, my stubborn will. But at 3 a.m, the difference between alone and witnessed felt enormous. Vincent's silence did not demand gratitude. It did not ask me to perform bravery for him. It just held space until my mind stopped replaying the basement. That kind of support is simple, and that is why it terrified me. Rescue was one thing. Letting someone matter was another. If I started depending on him, then losing him could break me in ways chains never managed. By the end of the week, the routine felt almost believable. Morning lists, afternoon bandages, evening quiet. Then the house began changing around me. New cameras appeared on the corners of the roofline, their lenses blinking red at dusk. A technician threaded cable through the basement ceiling, and the word basement made my stomach lurch. Guards rotated more often. Twice, I noticed the same perimeter checked again, as if someone suspected a breach that had not happened yet. Vincent's phone calls grew shorter, sharper. Nobody told me why. I felt the air tighten, like a storm gathering beyond the gates. The alarm starts as a low pulse that turns into a scream, vibrating through the walls and straight through my bones. For half a second I'm back on concrete, counting drips, waiting for footsteps to decide my fate. Then glass shatters somewhere below the hallway, and the house snaps into motion. Boots pound, radios hiss. A man yells an instruction I don't catch, and my body folds inward like it remembers how to survive. I'm in the small clinic room off the kitchen, sorting gauze when the first impact hits. The lights flicker. My hands freeze midair. I taste metal in my mouth, the old panic flavor. The door swings open and Vincent is there, already moving, already scanning, his face stripped down to pure calculation. He catches my wrist, not hard, just firm enough to reroute me, and I understand the message without words. Stay behind him, stay alive. Caleb appears in the corridor like he grew out of the shadow, one hand on a weapon, the other on a radio, talking fast in a tight, controlled cadence. Men fan out. A second crash booms from the front of the house. I hear the sharp crack of gunfire in the distance, not close enough to feel, close enough to know it's real. My lungs seize. Vincent shifts his body to block my line of sight and shepherds me down the hall, his shoulder a moving wall. We turn into a paneled section that looks like every other wall until Vincent presses his palm to a small scanner. A hidden door releases with a heavy click. Cold air spills out, smelling like concrete and electronics. The sight of bare cement makes my stomach drop. But this is different. Clean, bright, intentional. He guides me inside and the door seals behind us with a hydraulic hiss that sounds like finality. The panic room is smaller than I expected. A square of reinforced calm. Shelves hold water bottles, protein bars, blankets, and a medical kit more complete than my little clinic. A backup generator hums in the corner, steady as a heartbeat. A bank of monitors lines one wall, each feed showing a different angle of the property. Driveway, foyer, stairwell, back garden, roofline. The cameras turn the attack into black and white choreography. Men in dark gear move room to room, methodical, fast. I sit on the bench because my legs forget how to stand. My fingers shake, and I press them into my thighs until the tremor slows. Vincent stays upright, eyes on the screens, jaw tight. Caleb's voice crackles through the wall speaker, updating positions, counting intruders. I watch a figure kick open a door that leads to the blue room I slept in. My skin goes cold. They aren't rummaging for jewelry. They aren't grabbing laptops. They are searching, sweeping, hunting. Vincent's breath changes, a small sound that tells me he's reached the same conclusion I have. His guilt rises like a tide, and for an instant I can almost see him rewriting the story as if he made this happen by bringing me here. The words he doesn't say press against the room. My mistake, my responsibility, my failure. I won't let them live. I force my voice to work, even if it comes out thin. I remind him, and myself, that Evan chose the basement. Evan chose the chain. Evan chose to send professionals into a house like this, through gates and cameras, because he believes he can still reach me. None of that is a calculation Vincent made. It's a cruelty Evan carries. I am not an object being traded between brothers. I am a person who survived one cage and refuses to step into another, even in someone's head. On the monitors, Vincent's men converge. I can't hear the details, only the rhythm of movement, the way the intruders hesitate when they realize they've been anticipated. One attacker drops out of frame. Another is forced to the ground. The feed flickers with muzzle flashes, distant and brief, like lightning in a storm. I breathe slowly, counting in fours, the way I teach patience through pain. Caleb's updates become shorter, more confident. The sound of the alarm dulls, then cuts off. Silence rushes in so hard it makes my ears ring. Vincent finally sits beside me, not close enough to trap, close enough to anchor. His shoulders sag a fraction, the smallest surrender. Caleb's voice confirms the threat is contained, that survivors are restrained, that the perimeter is being reset. I should feel relief. I feel anger, hot and bright, because this means Evan is closer than we thought, and because safety keeps changing its shape. Vincent stands again, decision returning to him like a coat. He tells Caleb to secure the scene, collect everything, erase traces that could be used against us. Then he looks at me, eyes dark with something that isn't apology, more like promise. This house is compromised. We are leaving tonight. A secondary property, quieter, harder to find, more layers, more distance. Mrs. Alvarez's face flashes in my mind, and I picture my clinic logbook, my bandages, the tiny scraps of normal I built. I wonder if Evan will follow us. I nod, because I understand strategy, but my chest aches anyway. I had just started to breathe here. Now the air is tightening again, and the enemy has learned our pattern. We left before dawn, 2 cars sliding out through the damaged gate like nothing had happened. The city lights faded behind tinted glass. Ahead, the highway was empty and wet. I watched trees replace buildings, and my chest stayed tight, waiting for alarms that never sounded in the back, always. The new property sat beyond a winding road and a wall of pines, modern lines tucked into dark woods. Security lights blinked at intervals, colder than moonlight. Inside, everything was quieter, even the air. Quiet should mean peace, but to me it meant listening harder for footsteps that might return. Mrs. Alvarez did not come with us. Another housekeeper met me with the same careful kindness, but I missed her familiar steadiness. My room had clean white sheets, a wide window, and a keypad lock that clicked softly. I hated the lock, and I hated needing it to feel secure. Vincent changed after the attack. He still doubled guards and checked cameras, but he stopped treating me like a fragile package. He brought me a phone sealed in a box and a laptop with a case. He explained in his blunt way that control could not be my cage again. The phone's screen glowed with icons and an encrypted messaging app. The laptop opened to email, monitored but usable. Caleb gave me a list of rules, then stepped back as if proving they were guardrails, not handcuffs. I tested it by sending a message to Denise and felt it spike. Eli stayed in my thoughts like a bruise I touched to confirm it hurts. I could not call him yet. The risk was too high, and I understood that with clarity. Still, I opened a notes app and wrote reminders. School pickup times, favorite snacks, the song I never forgot. Denise answered within an hour. Seeing her name on the screen made my throat close, because it proved the old world still remembered me. Her message was steady and furious on my behalf. She said the hospital had held a memorial, and she hated it more than she could admit. She offered to help me return, even if not to the ER yet. She reminded me I was one of the best nurses she had trained, and that trauma did not erase skill. The encouragement warmed me, then scared me. Going back meant crowds, and Evan's eyes finding me again. I sat with the tug until it felt like rope against my ribs. Part of me wanted Halls again. Part of me wanted to vanish if it kept Eli safe. Vincent's world offered protection, but it carried risk. I decided I would return to medicine on my terms, not fears. A week later, Caleb forwarded a contact for a nonprofit guiding struggling clinics. They needed remote help, not heroics. I reviewed cases on the laptop and sent recommendations. One file was a child with fever and neck pain. My notes urged escalation. The director later confirmed the child got care. The work was quiet, but it pulled me back toward who I used to be. It felt like I could send something good into the world while hiding. When I finished each consult, I imagined Eli someday hearing that his mom helped other kids from a room with guards outside. Vincent's days grew louder with meetings. I heard talk of holdings and the word transition repeated like a vow. He never sold me a redemption story. He simply worked, signing papers, taking calls, cutting away pieces that could be cut. Watching him made empathy complicated in ways I not expect. The new rules allowed supervised trips into the city. The first time, I watched people carrying groceries and felt like a ghost. A guard stayed close but did not crowd. I bought shampoo, mailed a letter to Denise, and stood outside a school playground a little too long before leaving. Wanting a future returned in dangerous ways. I caught myself planning meals I might cook with Eli, picturing homework at a kitchen table. Each hope made me softer, and softness felt risky. It was easier to survive when I expected nothing. Now I expected something, and that could be taken. One evening, Vincent mentioned a charity gala in the city. He needed to attend for business, and he wanted me beside him. Not as bait or decoration, but as proof he could stand in public with someone real. The invitation felt like a dare, and I did not know why. If I went, I would be seen. If I was seen, Evan could trace me again. Yet hiding forever would erase me just as surely as any death certificate. I stared at the window, listening to the woods, and wondered which risk was worse, being hunted or losing myself completely. The next day, Caleb brought garment bags, and my stomach flipped. Mrs. Alvarez would have teased me into courage, but she was miles away. I told myself this was another kind of triage, another room full of strangers with sharp smiles. I just had to walk in and keep breathing. The dress felt like armor before it felt like silk. In the mirror, the emerald fabric turned my skin warmer, made my eyes look less haunted, and I hated how much that mattered. I pinned my hair back the way I used to for long shifts, practical first, pretty second. Heels clicked on the hardwood like a warning. Caleb waited by the front door with the same quiet patience he used on perimeter duty, and outside a black car idled with tinted windows, rain beating on the hood. Vincent did not try to sell the night as normal. I could feel the briefing in the air, even without anyone spelling it out. Stay within sight, keep hands on your glass, watch exits, do not let strangers steer you into corners. It was absurd that a charity gala required the same instincts as a trauma bay, but my body understood. In a room full of polished predators, etiquette was just another kind of weapon. I slid the encrypted phone into my clutch and reminded myself I had survived worse than small talk. The hotel ballroom glittered like it had never heard of fear. Crystal chandeliers threw light onto white tablecloths and perfect smiles. People wore wealth the way Vincent wore his suit, like a second skin. The air was layered with perfume and expensive liquor, and the soft hum of a band playing something that sounded harmless. I stayed close to Vincent as we moved through the crowd. His hand found the small of my back more than once, not possessive, just guiding, keeping me from being separated. Every touch steadied my breathing. Watching him here was its own kind of education. At home he was quiet, sharp-edged, built from rules and restraint. Under the chandeliers he became charming, almost effortless. He greeted donors, laughed at the right moments, remembered names and spouses and project timelines. Men leaned in like they wanted his approval. Women touched his sleeve as if testing how close they could get. Yet behind the performance I saw the loneliness. Nobody spoke to Vincent like a human being. They spoke to him like a bank, a threat, a ladder. I recognized the games because I had played my own version in hospital hallways. Different stakes, same strategy. A rival board member cornered Vincent near the auction display, smiling too wide, pretending to congratulate him while dropping barbed comments about how his foundation must be very convenient. I felt Vincent stiffen under my hand. He could have cut the man down with a look, but that would feed the rumor mill. So I stepped forward with the calm tone I used on difficult patients, and asked about the rival's programs, which clinics he funded, what outcomes he tracked, how many children his grants actually served. His answers slid around specifics, all buzzwords and vague promises. I kept my face neutral and kept asking, tightening the circle the way I tightened a blood pressure cuff. What counties did he cover? Which hospital partners? What percentage went to overhead? Who audited his numbers? The people around us listened, their smiles turning brittle. The rival excused himself in a hurry, suddenly fascinated by his phone. Vincent's fingers pressed once at my back, a brief signal that landed like approval. For the first time that night, I felt less like a risk and more like a partner. The rest of the gala passed in bright fragments. I shook hands, accepted compliments I didn't trust, and watched Vincent steer conversations toward legitimacy with surgical precision. More than once, someone tried to treat me like an accessory, and Vincent corrected it by mentioning my work with underserved clinics, making my competence visible. It should have felt like protection. It felt like recognition. When we finally slipped out to the car, the cold air hit my cheeks, and I realized I had been holding my breath for hours. On the drive back, the city blurred into streaks of light. Vincent's hand rested near mine on the console, close but careful, like he was testing what I would allow. I stared out the window and admitted the truth I had been avoiding. Gunfire was terrifying, but it was clean in a way feelings were not. Bullets ended or missed. Wanting someone did neither. Wanting Vincent meant imagining mornings, imagining Eli's laughter in a safe kitchen, imagining a future I could lose. The thought made my stomach twist with the same nausea as the basement, because it proved I was alive enough to be broken again. That night the nightmare came back vicious and detailed. In it, the basement door stood open and no one came down. Freedom hovered just out of reach, crueler than any lock. I woke, gasping, tangled in sheets, my heart slamming. I waited for the hallway sound I had come to rely on. The chair shift, the quiet presence on the other side of my door. Minutes passed. Nothing. The silence pressed on my ribs. He was giving me space after the closeness of the gala, doing what a respectful man should do. And it hurt anyway. I lay staring into the dark, realizing distance wasn't protection. It was just distance, and morning would demand answers. Somewhere in the house my phone stayed dark, but I could feel the next crisis gathering, like footsteps above stairs I couldn't see, yet already listening. Vincent told me Evan had made contact just after breakfast, like he was announcing weather. I felt my stomach flip, then harden. Evan was not weather. He was the reason my son fell asleep without me for months. I listened to Vincent explain that an intermediary had offered terms, information traded for safe passage and money. The part that burned was how calmly he said he had already answered. Decisions again. Around me. For me. My hands clenched until my nails left crescents in palm. I could feel the old basement helplessness trying to creep back. The same sick lesson that my voice did not matter. I forced it to matter. I reminded him that being alive on paper decided whether I could hold Eli's hand at a clinic or sign a school form. Vincent's focus stayed on risk and consequence, the way he ran everything. He wanted me hidden, controlled, safe. I wanted truth, choice, and a plan that included my consent. Not someday. Later. Not when he decided. Vincent did not soften, but he adjusted. He laid out a compromise that sounded like strategy, not comfort. I would not go to the meeting, and he would not lock me away from it. Caleb would take me to a secure condo downtown, high floor, reinforced doors, clean sightlines. I would watch real-time video and hear real-time audio. If I caught something off, I would warn them. I was not a hostage. I was part of the operation. My fear came anyway. A little after 8 at night, the condo felt like a sterile waiting room with a skyline view. Screens covered the dining table. Cables ran to a laptop that lit my face ghost pale. Caleb checked radios, then stepped back, giving me space to think. On the monitors, an abandoned warehouse loaded in from several angles. Vincent arrived with 4 men and placed them like chess pieces. I watched his posture, the stillness that meant he was ready to strike. My pulse kept time alone. Evan stepped into frame with swagger that made my skin crawl, thinner than I remembered but still convinced the world owed him. He moved like he owned the empty space, talking too much, gesturing with a flash drive as if it were leverage. Vincent stayed calm, letting Evan spill his resentment. Even through grainy video I saw the obsession, the way Evan's gaze kept cutting toward the area where a transport van would wait. He was not bargaining for exile. He was hunting for me. I forced myself to scan the secondary feeds, the ones showing the street and dark corners beyond the warehouse. That is when I saw it. 3 figures sliding along a fence line, not toward Vincent, but toward the van route. My body went cold, like the moment I heard keys in the basement door. Evan assumed I would be nearby. I leaned toward Caleb, pointed at the screen, and described what I saw with clarity. Caleb relayed it, voice tight, fingers flying over his radio. On the main feed, Vincent's posture shifted half a beat, the smallest sign he had received the warning. He delayed, then guided the conversation to the van with a calm that felt cruel. A command popped the doors open. Inside was nothing but equipment and empty space. The shooters hesitated, confused, and that hesitation was all Vincent's team needed. Men moved in from angles I had not noticed, pinning threats to the ground without spectacle. The warehouse fight ended before my lungs remembered to breathe. The camera caught Evan trying to retreat, anger making him clumsy. A figure I recognized as Caleb's second tackled him outside the frame, and then Evan was back on screen on his knees, hands restrained. My body sagged with a relief so sharp it felt like pain. Vincent remained upright calm, and I hated how steady he looked while my hands shook. Caleb returned to the condo later, confirming Vincent was unhurt. Then he added the detail that poisoned the victory. Evan had inside help. Inside help meant someone knew my routines and sold them. It meant the trap was designed by a mind that had watched us live. I pictured a staff member smiling at breakfast, a guard holding a door, a driver learning routes. My skin prickled with betrayal. Evan did not need luck to reach me. He had access. Capturing him did not close the story. It opened a worse chapter, because the enemy was no longer outside the gates. The enemy had a key somewhere close. Vincent reached the condo later, sleeves rolled, eyes still sharp with control. He crouched beside me so I could see he was real, not a monitor image. I did not melt into him. I just breathed until my ribs stopped shaking. The room smelled of electronics and coffee. Caleb stepped away to coordinate the moves. Vincent's focus split between my face and the new threat. Evan was contained, but the person who helped him was not. Tomorrow I would choose closure. Tonight the hunt began. After the warehouse, the city looked the same from the condo window. Traffic ribbons, blinking towers, indifferent light. My hands finally stopped shaking, but my mind stayed braced, waiting for the next sound that would mean Evan wasn't really contained. Vincent sat across from me with his sleeves rolled up, calm on his face, and I realized relief could be numb. Captured did not mean finished. Captured just meant the story changed shape. I told Vincent I wanted to see Evan. Not because I needed revenge, and not because I believed in neat closure, but because I needed my voice back in the one place it had been stolen. I needed to look at the man who built a basement around my life and prove, with my own eyes, that he didn't get to keep it. Vincent didn't argue. He arranged it the way he arranged everything. Controlled, documented, safe. The room where they kept Evan was clean enough to be insulting. Bright lights, a plain table, guards stationed near the exits, no drip counting out my panic. Evan sat restrained in a chair, smaller than he had ever felt in my memory, yet his stare still tried to claim space. My body wanted to retreat, but I planted my feet and let the fear burn out into something steadier. I spoke without raising my voice. I named what happened in language he couldn't romanticize. It was never about love. It was entitlement dressed up as interest. It was control pretending to be wounded pride. He had decided my no was an injury he could punish, and he had tried to turn my survival instincts into submission. I did not come to debate him or to absorb his excuses. I came to make one fact undeniable. I survived, and my life would not be the wreckage he pointed to when he wanted to feel powerful. I was not his aftermath. I was a person walking out of the room on my own feet. Evan's expression shifted, searching for angles, but there were none left. The only leverage he had was poison, and he spit it anyway. Through intermediaries, he revealed that he hadn't found me alone. Someone inside Vincent's circle had fed him my schedule and routes, had told him when I was vulnerable, had convinced him he could strike again. The words landed like a second abduction. Not because Evan said them, but because they were plausible. Vincent went rigid beside me, the first real crack in his control. I watched his mind do what it always did. Assign blame, calculate failures, try to carry every consequence alone. I refused that narrative too. Perfection isn't protection. Omniscience isn't a promise anyone can keep. What matters is what you do once you see the truth. I told him to do what he does best. Be methodical, be relentless, and use systems that last longer than anger. They found the traitor within a day. Gabe Santoro, a logistics coordinator with access to calendars, routes, and the quiet details that make a kidnapping possible. He admitted it when confronted with evidence. Messages, payments, timestamps. Vincent did not drag him into a dark room. He didn't need to. He handed the whole file to federal authorities along with additional crimes Gabe had committed for years, charges heavy enough to erase any fantasy of bargaining. Watching that happen was its own kind of justice. Not dramatic, not bloody, final. When the house finally went quiet again, Vincent sat with me at the kitchen counter of the northern property and laid out options like he was laying down weapons. Witness protection could give me a new name. Private relocation could give me control with resources. Or I could stay in his orbit with real autonomy, a life chosen daily, not guarded like a secret. He didn't promise safety as a fairy tale. He promised consent. If I wanted to leave, I would leave with support, not guilt. I chose to stay, and I forced myself to name why. Not because I was grateful, not because I was afraid, not because trauma blurred my judgment. I chose it because I wanted a future that included the work I loved and the people I was learning to trust. I chose it because I refused to let Evan steal one more decision. The next steps were practical. Correcting my records, rebuilding custody, showing up for Eli in slow, steady ways until he believed I was real again. Homework at a table where no one whispered about my death. We moved into a smaller apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught sunrise. Light filled the kitchen. I kept consulting for the nonprofit, guiding clinics that served families who needed someone to notice the small signs early. Vincent kept meeting with investors, trimming away the old world piece by piece. Some nights I still startled at sudden sounds. Healing isn't linear, but I slept with curtains open, letting dawn remind my body that darkness is not permanent. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after something you didn't deserve, I hope this reminded you that survival is step one. Choosing your life is the victory. And if this story stayed with you, leave a comment with one word: still here. Like the video if you want more stories like this, and share it with someone who needs some light.